Okay, everyone, let's go ahead and get started. Today is a work session on AO 2026, no, 20, AO 2026-14, an ordinance of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly providing for the submission to qualified voters to be held on April 7, 2026, to approve a special tax levy only in 26 for the payment of operational expenses to the Anchorage School District. So that is the ordinance. We are noticed today from 10:15 to 11:15, and we will do introductions and we'll move into our presentations.
Aaron Baldwin-Day.
Zach Johnson.
Scott Myers.
Anna Brawley.
Yarrow Silvers.
And on the phone, we have Mr. Gerker
Present, thank you.
and any other members. Okay, well, we'll shout folks out as they join. We're also joined by members of the administration and the school district who will present shortly. Some folks in the back from Department of Law, Assembly Council, and Clerk's Office. And then we also have a presentation. So that is again in members' inboxes and online. So I will turn it over to Mr. Falsey and Mr. Ratliff.
Thank you, Chair Brawley. This is Bill Falsey, the Chief Administrative Officer. We previously presented to the Assembly in a work session at Budget and Finance about a week ago. And the idea was to set the table and then collect any questions. We actually didn't receive questions after that last work session, but I know that we have a slightly different composition of members available today. So the slides were so nice. We're going to do them twice. And I'll run through them again and we'll collect any questions that have emerged. So from our perspective, general government's perspective, the question is, what can the municipality of Anchorage give the school district? And because this is slightly inherently complex, we're going to step through this piece by piece. In the main, there are two pieces. We must give the school district the required local contribution that is set out in state law. And we can give the school district an optional additional local contribution that is also capped by state law. What are those amounts? The required local contribution is set out in law as 2.65 mils, really the equivalent of 2.65 mils. And it's also capped in a way that we are never actually close to. The optional additional local contribution is capped at the greater of an additional 2 mils or 23% of the district's state determined basic need. And in practice, the bigger number is 23% of the district's state determined basic need. So what has changed and why are we talking about this? First, the required local contribution changed. In 2026, we were required to give $127 million. It's going to be 138 this year. And the reason that changed is because our property assessments increased. I said that last time, it probably has a little bit more currency this time. And by way of reminder, as we are all coming to tell every one of our constituents, taxes are not assessments, but they're related. Taxes are the mill rate times the assessed taxable property value. And the way the school funding formula works is that as our required local contribution goes up, as our property values go up, the amount of state funding actually goes down dollar for dollar. So the amount that the state is contributing to the school district goes down by $11 million. And again, crashing into a separate conversation, this is another reason why there really is no incentive and actually potentially a disincentive to juice property valuations here in the municipality. It can actually impoverish general government as a general rule. All right, what else changed? Well, the real thing that we're talking about today is that the cap on the additional local contribution went up. And that is because the base student allocation increased. And folks will remember that was a big news story last fall. Well, after the session ended, there was an override of the governor's veto that effectively raised the base student allocation and permanently changed district basic need. And that happened in August. So the typical school district budget timeline is that by February, the school district school board has adopted its school budget. Then it's sent to you for actual adoption and implementation. And then we have set our first quarter budget revisions. They have set their school budget. And then we set the mill levies in April and taxes are actually set. By a slight side note, which is that you'll know that when the legislature session ends in June and school funding is finally fixed then or after, like it was last year, that's a little bit awkward for the school district because then they're often setting budgets where they don't actually know where the state's funding is really going to land. Okay, Why are we talking about this now instead of in March when we usually receive the budget? That is partly because, as a result of the quarterly charter required joint assembly and school board meeting, we sort of were put more on notice that the consequence of the state's August veto override was that it has raised the cap on the amount that the school district can receive from general government. And as you know, this month is the deadline for putting ballot propositions to voters. And practically, the only way that we could reach to the maximum contribution is by asking voters for more authorization. So what will we actually budget to give the school district? Well, we have to give the required local contribution, so that's definitely going to happen. The path that we were on before the state changed the rules was that we gave 97 as optional last year. We were going to give 96 this year, or we could give 96 this year. And if you look at every one of the school district's budgets, maybe since time immemorial, but certainly for the last decade, all of them have had this note that says the district is real fortunate to have a community that is very supportive of public education and always gives the maximum allowed under state law. And that's been true. We've, at the time that we have adopted the budget, to the best of our understanding, we have always contributed the max that we understood that we could give. Sometimes the state changed the rules after the game. We came up a little bit short, but generally, we are a community that has said this is a first priority investment. So we are on a path that before the rules changed, we were going to do an additional $9 million, almost $10 million. After the August BSA change, the optional cap has gone to 108, which means there is another 11.8 that could potentially be given to the school district. Now, we have one tax cap as a municipality. So as the school district's opportunities have changed, of course, the tax cap did not jump by $11.8 million in a way that would be simple to implement for the school district. So because the change was not gradual year over year from the state, but rather this quantum jump, we really are in a place now where we feel like the only practical way to close this gap is to go to voters for authorization. And so that is the ordinance that was introduced on January 13th. And it provides that we are looking to have your permission to ask voters, do you want a special tax levy to help continue our long tradition of fully funding the school district to the max extent that we can? It would be designed specifically to close that gap. It'd be a one-time, this calendar year only, levy of $11.8 million. And this is how it would appear on the ballot. Exactly that. A special tax levy to fund teacher positions and student programming, a one-time special tax to collect $11.8 million. That doesn't close the whole of the school district's gap, and you'll hear more of that from Andy as I pass the baton to him. They crash into their budget season in something closer to a negative $80 million position, but this is what we can do to contribute. And we heard from the superintendent at the press release, at the press conference, that $11.8 million could translate to something like 90 teacher positions, reduce class sizes by about 2 kids per class, which is a meaningful investment. With that, I'm happy to answer some questions, but I think what I'd like to do is pass it over to Andy, who can give a little bit more, Mr. Ratliff, who can give a little bit more from the school district's perspective.
Thank you. For the record, I'm Andy Ratliff from the CFO for the Anchorage School District. I have a few slides. Some of it's going to be same information Mr. Falsey just gave, but this is just kind of a high level overview of where our calendar is right now. We're trying to clean up our budget and get it to balance. We've spent hundreds of hours sequestered in a room over the last 3 weeks trying to get this thing to balance because it is up to about 90 million. We did settle our biggest contracts with the teachers. That increased our deficit a little bit, so have to cut a little more, but that's kind of the cost of doing business. Those significant dates, we'll have board meetings, our first two, or the first and third Tuesdays in February. We'll introduce the budget hopefully by next Friday afternoon, so we should be coming, we'll have all that. That's when it'll be public if everything goes somewhat smoothly. And then we'll introduce it on February 3rd. The board will have a chance to vote on the 17th. Sometimes they add an additional meeting if they need more discussion on it, but that's really kind of the plan. They will not include anything regarding the levy as far as what our deficit is or how we're creating our budget. It's going to be as if that doesn't exist yet, because we are going to wait for that vote. I do anticipate the board coming out with a memo to say how that money will be spent. If it's anything like previous years, last year, it's all, first buy down class sizes, and there's anything else that they really want. That's, but again, that's board decision, but we expect that to be part of their budget process where they amend it to say, if we get this money, here's how it will be spent, like we did last year. Then again, we give it to the city for introduction and approval, and then the vote on the 7th. So really what's kind of been, driving the issue is just this continued flat funding from the state. We've been covering it with different, funding mechanisms throughout the years between either federal stimulus funding or fund balance, which is nearly expended. So we really don't have that as a revenue source. But really what kind of triggered us to be able to do this early is you see kind of those shaded blue bars are, the blue bar is the permanent BSA. The shaded blue is either one-time money, which if we get one-time money, that's fine, but then it goes away the next year as far as our assumptions go. So when we don't collect that additional local contribution, which is allowable because we received the one-time money, the next year we kind of reset it down to the lower level. And typically we don't find out about that until sometime between June, and this year we didn't find out about what we'd get until August. So it really limits the amount that we can come back and try to collect throughout the years when it's just the one time, but it keeps changing after the fact. So that's really kind of why we're having this big deficit. $700 is about 50 million. A $700 BSA equivalent or BSA is about a little under $50 million for the district, to put that in context. So and you guys have seen most of this before, as when we detailed this out of our joint meeting last month. But our fund balance goes away, and you see above that the 9.7 million in property taxes. That's the net of the 11.2 million going up for the required, and then the current municipal tax cap limiting on how much we can collect and reducing that additional local by about $1.5 million. And then you can see the state foundation funding going down by about 15 million. 11.2 of that is that required local contribution that gets cost shifted to us, and then the rest is going to be enrollment related. And that's really kind of what this says, is when we calculate our portion of the municipal tax cap, we only have the one overarching cap, but historically we've kind of calculated them in parallel. So one government's not trying to take more than what they should. I mean, it works out pretty well, I think, that way. But when we calculate it ourselves, we could only increase by 9.7 million, although the required amount goes up by more than that, meaning we have to take the delta from that additional local contribution. So that wouldn't be at the state max, which is now about 108 million plus. So that's really where that 11.8 million comes into play as far as outside of the municipal tax cap and up to the state tax cap. Over time, since the last decade, at the bottom, you can see the change. We've cost shifted over 35 million in funds from the city to the state over that time period. A lot more in terms of real dollars as that accumulates. That's just the 1-year change or the 10-year change. And then that local contribution has gone down because we just can't collect it at this point. And up until this year, it's really been, in kind of enrollment driven as that's gone down. But, as we've capped this year by that local tax cap because of the increase in the required, that's made it go down a little bit further. Just as context, this is what was in the state's FY26, how much they've grown over the years. They've had after that $700 increase, we included that. There's been an 8.5% increase overall to fund education, whereas the other departments have grown largely with inflation, as you would expect to see. Some of them are outside of that. You see public safety and corrections, that going up more quickly than inflation would, but a lot of the other ones just kind of tied to general inflation. I think if you looked at the governor's budget for FY27, they're proposed, that funding for K-12 support goes down even further. And that's largely those additional local or the required local contributions, that cost shifting, and then changes in enrollment. So you will see the K-12 and the governor's budget go down by quite a bit, and that number will come down, but we don't know where it's going to land because they're just starting the session. So with that, I think we can probably open up to questions.
Questions from members? I have one to start, I guess. Oh, and then, Mr. Gerker, I'll ask this one and then we can go. So can you go back to, Mr. Ratliff, the slide? It was comparing the 20, yeah, this one, thank you. So just to be clear, the state is required now to give us $15 million less. So can you explain, I guess I'm having trouble squaring, the BSA increased, obviously. We know that the talk at the time was it was not going to be sufficient to make up where we were. But how is it possible that we're actually getting less money from the state than we did last year or than we are this year?
So the BSA, we did get one-time fundings and about a $680 equivalent in FY '25. So FY '26 remained about steady, but then FY '27, it's really that $11.2 million cost shifting that is going to come out of that state revenue. So of that 15.4 million, 11.2 is really just cost shifting from the city or to the city from the state. The rest of it, about 4.2 million, is going to be related to enrollment. So as our enrollment's gone down over the years, so goes the state foundation revenue.
Okay, thanks. And then just again, connecting back to our property tax base, Mr. Falls, you mentioned, as that increases, can you again explain? I'm still trying to get my head around that part.
So, and I can explain that
Okay.
a little bit too. And we look at the full and true value of the second preceding year. So it's going to be the 2025 property values, net of any optional exemptions. So those don't count in it. So if you see our total tax levy amount is going to be lower than what was on the full and true value. So they take 2.65 mils of that, and then they say, it says you guys have to pay this, we're not paying it. And so that continues to increase every year, but the BSA hasn't, kept up with that same pace of growth. So that's what's kind of limited our ability to grow that additional local too.
And I'll add to that by saying that this regime has been in place for a very long time. This was not affected by the BSA change, this required local contribution framework. But it is a little slightly misapplied to a jurisdiction with the tax cap, because it seems like in original conception, the idea was every locality has to kick in 2.65 mils. And that might be quote unquote easy because every year the government is going to set the same mill rate. And if their property is worth more, they'll have more taxes. But that's not actually how it works in Anchorage. And so when property values go up, it's actually just parasitic on state funding. Now we just have to push more money into the school district. And so, as Andy said, $15 million less from the state. 11 of it is just because of this required local contribution thing, which has been in place for a very, very long time. The other is enrollment and some other onesie-twosies.
Thanks. Yeah, I think we keep discovering places where formulas are a challenge. So, question.
And I should say one
yeah.
other thing, which is that, so you're right. I think there is in the vogue in currency that the BSA change should have increased state funding to the school district. And what I don't want to get lost in this is that, but for the BSA change, the state contribution would have gone down even further. So it was still a very helpful change. But the bottom line is that we're still looking at reduced state funding for these reasons.
Yeah, and as we look at 26 to 27, the BSA remains the same for that, according to, or on our modeling, because we don't know what the state's going to do at this point. So we had the $700 increase for this year, and it's in statutes. We're projecting that for next year.
Okay, thank you. I have Mr. Gooker and then Ms. Silvers.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and I've got a comment, and then I have a lot of questions, but I'll ask the first couple. I'm sorry, it's echoing. I don't know if people could turn off their mic.
Yeah, does anybody else have their mic? Okay, go ahead.
All right, thank you. Yeah, so I have a lot of questions, but I'll ask the first couple, and then I'll yield the floor back to somebody else. The first is a comment. Andy, you referenced earlier the teacher salary increase. You noted that it increased the deficit a little bit. It's actually a 20% increase in the deficit, which doesn't seem like a little bit to me. Can you point to specific reforms or corrective actions that are already implemented, not things that are planned, but things that are already implemented, that can give taxpayers some sort of confidence this money won't simply postpone the problem to another year?
I think how to phrase this. So our budget deficit, originally we projected about 83 million or so. settled the teacher's contract, and that increased it by another 6 million or so. So it's not, a huge percentage of, I don't think it's a huge percentage of what difference in what we had before. And then as far as,
I'm sorry, go ahead, continue.
oh. And then the second question was the assurance of how the money would be used.
Yeah, no, I want to know, a lot of people want to know who have been reaching out to me, what reforms you guys are already taking right now. Look, an $83 million structural deficit doesn't just happen, right? Like there's obviously decisions that have been made. So people want to know what actions have been taken that's going to fix this issue going forward, so we're not just pumping money into this. And then just real quick, you said $6 million, but it's a 17% increase, which is per the numbers you gave me at our last work session. And again, I understand this over the course of the entire agreement. That is a $17 million increase. So you have a $83 million deficit that you guys are saying you have, and then you just agreed to lock in another $17 million into that deficit at least. So please continue.
The 17% increase for the teachers is going to be spread over 4 years. So the next year is they're getting a 5% wage increase. They got a 3% wage increase this year. So that is not going to be really truly reflected in our FY27 budget. It'll be spread out through FY29. As far as the reforms we're making, I think if we pass one-time funding, again, that's one-time funding that would go away next year. So I believe you're correct in saying that we are going to have another, albeit smaller cliff next year, but there is going to be, it's not going away. It's just going to get slightly smaller. Once we make all the $90 million in reductions that we have to this year, we will still have some additional reductions to make the next year, but potentially if this is one-time funding that goes away, more reductions there to the extent that our teacher's contract or other contracts may exceed any inflationary adjustment we get in our base student allocation or however that shakes out with the state and local revenue. We could have additional shortfalls there. So, I can't assure that anything's going away. It's just getting a little bit less.
Yeah, and just to clarify, you said if the one-time funding goes away, it's one-time funding, it will go away. Unless, are you guys intending to ask for more one-time funding?
Well, the way the tax levy is written, it is 1 year. We know the state's looking at, and they have a education task force that's reviewing the funding models. So we don't know what's going to come out of that. Hopefully some good reform, but we're not really sure at this point. Frankly, we're all school districts beggars of funds, and we're out here begging the funds from city, from the state, from anyone we can help, because we have no control over how much revenue comes to the district.
So if the state doesn't find more money to send your guys' way, what is the concrete plan? What is the action plan? There's cuts obviously, but what else?
I mean, that's the lever we have to pull to get our budget to balance, is cutting, because we can't control our revenue.
Okay. All right. I yield back. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Silvers.
I wonder, because the questions that I'm getting from the public, and so I wonder if you could just talk a little bit more about where you think this levy would go, what the school district would use that for.
Ultimately, this is going to be a school board decision. They're the ones that ultimately set how we spend our money. It's hard to imagine it wouldn't just go directly to lower those class sizes for the most part. I don't know if they have any other ideas. I really haven't spoken to them about it. We haven't met with them since, I think, December. So, well, we didn't talk about it much. They didn't bring it up on Tuesday, really, but it's hard to imagine it would go anywhere other than that, frankly.
Okay. And I actually have an amendment, which you guys have, which is kind of to that intent. And it's non-binding, of course, but it's to the intent of lowering class sizes, because that is, I think we agree with you, or I agree with you that that's a big problem. And the parents and the teachers that I've spoken to and that have emailed have, also brought that up as a concern.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, it's not going to get any better. So till something's fixed.
Thanks. There isn't anybody else in the queue right now. And so, Mr. Crooker, I know we had communicated about, you also kind of giving a overview of your amendment if you can do that, and if you have other questions.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So one of the questions that I've gotten a lot from constituents and concerns people have about this is the one-timeness of it all. And so this really is just adding a couple clarifying words to the ordinance just to make it explicitly clear. So if you're a resident who's never read this or not following this or anything like that, and you're just seeing it for the first time in the ballot booth or like I say, your kitchen table, because that's how we do it now, that you'll be able to read it, understand that this is a one-time tax levy. So this is, and it is a property tax levy, so they understand where the funds are coming from and that it is a one-time thing for 2026.
Yeah, thank you. And
And
I know we don't, oh, go ahead, Mr. Crooker.
No, please go ahead.
Well, I also see Mr. Gates wanted to be in the queue.
Well, I can wait until Mr. Gugger's finished.
Okay, yeah, Mr. Crooker, is there anything else you wanted to say there?
On the amendment, no. Appreciate Dean and his team helping me pull this together.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Gates.
Oh, thank you. I just wanted to speak to Member Silver's question about where does this funding go? And from the special tax levy here, although the school board ultimately has control over its budget, the operations, and decides where it goes, this is a ballot proposition that the voters would approve, and they have specific words in here that are actually dedicating this funding from voter approval to these specific purposes to fund teacher positions and student programming. And we had some discussions about this, in the background. We were developing the ordinance and this ballot prop language. And I guess our understanding is pretty much that voter dedication of this means the school board has to comply, at least for that 11.8 million, and use it only for those purposes there. Oh, thank you, Mr. Fossey. He's pulled it up on the screen. So, but I guess overall, though, the school board can move the rest of its funding around and budget how it wants. So, fluidity there.
Thank you. And I guess I do have one question on the amendment. Again, just curious from administration and school district folks, is there any, this appears to be consistent with the intent and just really strengthens the language. Is there any, I guess, is there any legal issue or kind of policy issue that you see there?
Thanks, Madam Chair. We just received this now, so I'm reviewing it in real time, but at least on the first scan, no, I think it's just all clarifying language that's totally consistent with the original drafting intent.
Thank you. Yeah, that's what it seems to be on the surface. Great. Okay, then I will see if there are other questions. Ms. Baldwin-Day.
Yeah, I've had some questions from constituents around the choice not to close or repurpose schools this year. And I wanted to ask a question pertaining to the state foundation formula to be sure that I understand it correctly so that as I'm communicating with constituents, I can give accurate and factual information. So as I understand it, the first step of that foundational formula involves an assessment of the number of schools and the size of those schools. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And so when we close a school, we are changing how the foundation formula is applied to ASD. Is that true?
Correct. So really, that step in the foundation formula for the school size adjustment really says you have smaller schools, you get more money per kid. So fewer students, get more money per kid, kind of to account for these economies of scale as you get larger. So what happens is we convert 3 schools into 2, we're going to get less money per kid for the same amount of kids. But there is a hold harmless provision in statute for the first, and it kind of steps down over 5 years, but the first 2 years, you're held harmless for that school size adjustment. So that's really kind of the incentive school districts have to close schools, is you have a savings for a couple of years. Then you start decreasing the amount of revenue you get as though that's phased out. And in the end, kind of what we found, at least on the operational side, is, the amount of staff we can reduce by closing a school at the end of the day, after the end of the 5-year hold harmless period, is roughly equivalent to the amount of money the revenue we lose. So it's kind of a wash. It's really just to help districts kind of weather that moving cycle and incentivize them to do that, and then hopefully have, a few more students in those, or more students in those schools. You can have more staff and more supports kind of centralized. So that's really the benefit of doing it.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you. And then, so sort of follow on there, the piece of the foundation formula that pertains to special needs and intensive needs. How are those steps, step 3 and 5 of that formula calculation, how is ASD being impacted by those two pieces of the foundation formula?
So I'd say we're more heavily impacted with that third step, where they have that 20% multiplier that's more administrative block grant, and that's more tied to your total students. While we've seen a decrease in our population overall, our number of special education students has remained fairly steady, and our intensive needs students have actually gone up considerably. I mean, that just keeps growing leaps and bounds, but we do get an adjustment for based on the number of intensive needs students we have. So that's actually, the funding has actually gone up with that, although it hasn't been, inflation proof. It's subject to the same thing where, per student, we get the same amount as we did 10 years ago. It's not as helpful as it would if it had been inflation proofed.
So the state foundation formula has no inflation proofing associated with it.
Correct.
Okay.
Well, it does on their side, because their money goes down when the required local goes up. So kind of inflation proof for them.
Right. It's inflation proof for the state, but not for us.
Correct.
Fascinating. Thank you.
Okay, other questions? Okay, I do have one question, and I don't see anyone else in the queue at this moment. Just again, to dig into the one time, I know, well, we've heard, I guess, two ends of the spectrum kind of questioning this decision. On the one end saying, well, we need to solve this for the long term. And we know, of course, a lot of that is not in our hands, or really most of it. And then the other side is the concern, or, this general distrust, right? To say, okay, you said it's one time, and I think Mr. Gerker's amendment speaks to that. And we're worried about, that this will that it won't go away, right? And so I wonder if you could speak a little bit more to, and I'll use an example, the fleet levy that passed. Maybe you could contrast how that is structured, because it's a similar mechanism. It's not a bond, it's not a loan, but that one is written in a way that it can be utilized year over year. And then this one clearly says one time, multiple places. So if you can just kind of unpack that kind of policy choice and just distinguishing it from these other kind of typical ones we have. Thanks.
Happy to do that. As you correctly characterized, you could send a proposition to voters that says we have a permanent need for using, for snowplow equipment, or for police CAD RMS equipment, or for fire EMS equipment. And that has all happened in the past. And because that is a permanent need, it's been a permanent addition to our regime. This is not that. This will be a calendar year 2026, one-time $11.8 million, and then it will wink out of existence. And that is clearly indicated in the ballot language, and made even more clear if Mr. Gerker's amendment passes. Then the next question is why? If this is a permanent problem, why not a permanent fix? And partly I think the answer is because we remain in a state of flux. As Mr. Ratliff said, there's still continuing conversations at the state level about how education should be funded. This is primarily a state responsibility according to our Constitution, and that the majority of the funding comes from the state. And second, here locally, we have been beating the drum that property taxes we're overly reliant on the single source of property taxes, and that we can't permanently solve all of our problems by continuing to go to that source. And so for those two reasons, I think we want to see where the dust settles in Juneau. The governor even yesterday announced a potential statewide sales tax revenue measure. We want to see where the dust settles there. And then we don't want to make a permanent change to our revenue regime unless and until we've been able to engage the community in conversation about how we want that mechanism to really function.
Okay. And then just one quick follow-up. I guess in current law, unless something changes, is there an option for us to use other revenue other than property tax? So I understand that's not what this is, but I'm just wondering, I know it's our largest source by far. Historically, it's been what pays for it, but let's say hypothetically, we increase the bed tax 5 times, or, obviously not realistic, but some other source that could generate enough money. Is there any kind of limitation on us doing that with the way things are now?
There's not. The local contribution can be paid from any source, and the optional local contribution can be paid by any source.
Thank you. And then we had Mr. Gerker one more time in the queue.
Yeah, appreciate it. Mr. Ratliff, will ASD be submitting or sending out some sort of detailed spending plan before the April election so that voters will see exactly where this money is going to go?
Yeah, that would be my anticipation. Similar to last year when they passed an amendment at our budget time in February to say, if we got $1,000 BSA increase, here's exactly how we would spend the money. Anticipate the exact same process. They may do it with the BSA, but they'll definitely do it for the tax levy to say, here's how we're going to spend this 11.8 million, and they're going to have it detailed out well before it goes to the voters.
Okay, and will there be a follow-up, like when it's actually spent, say this is exactly how it was spent, exactly how we said it would be?
We'll produce a revised budget at that point and should have all the changes in there. So yeah, we'll do that. I don't know what the actual mechanism, and probably will come back to the city for additional upper limit spending approval at that time as well.
Okay. Is there any actual limitations, though, if you submit a plan and you say this is how we're intending to spend it, but there's nothing that actually boxes you in to actually spend it that way, correct?
I mean, yeah, again, ultimately the board has the the ability to change budgets as they see fit. They're our governing board. They can tell us how to spend the money, depending on how narrowly defined it ultimately gets in the statute or in the ordinance. That may be a limiting factor, but at this time, the board does have that ultimate authority.
Right. So basically, unless we write something in the ordinance saying it will be spent on X, Y, and Z, the school board can say this is our intent, but after it's passed, they can do whatever they want with it, essentially.
I would jump in and I'd answer that question slightly differently, which is that the way the school district is allowed to spend its money is locked down by the school board first, who then sends its budget to you. And you adopt the budget as well. The assembly doesn't get to make line edits to the school budget, but you can move it up or down in total amount. But that's the spending plan that freezes how the money could be spent. So if the budget is changed after the levy to implement the levy, the only way that it gets spent differently from what the school board and you have approved is if someone is not following the budget, which is exactly the same as if you passed a budget and we decided, oh, this year we're going to push all of the police funding department's money into traffic engineering. We can't do that legally. And so we have the same regime here that applies to the school district.
Well, I mean, there is a budget amendment process that they can go through, the board can go through. It's a public process to say, we want to move X dollars here. They can't do it without voting on it, and they can't do it without being in public. We do have some authority administratively to move stuff in categories, but by and large, 90% of our money goes to salaries and benefits. So once we get those people in place, it's really pretty difficult to shuffle them around in any sort of scale that would be material.
Yeah, and I appreciate that longer explanation, Mr. Falvey, but at the end of the day, this is about a special tax levy that voters are being asked to authorize, and I'm asking about accountability. I'm asking that the money that voters are actually being asked to authorize will actually be spent in a way that it's being presented that it will be. And it sounds like for voters, They just kind of have to take the school board on trust that that's actually going to be spent that way.
I
And
mean, I
that
suspect
does
that's with about
get,
any
you
level
know,
of government though, so it's.
well, no, actually, it's that's not how it should be, Mr. Elliff, and that's just. I'll save further comments, I think, for the actual dais, because I'll definitely have some debate and some sharp commentary. But I think that comment, well, that kind of flippantness that you just displayed, is a big part of why people are having such a hard time with this. They're looking at a school district that does not seem to be able to manage its finances well whatsoever, and they're being asked to increase their taxes yet again for the school district. And then it's just kind of a flippant, well, we'll just spend it, however we want to spend it. It's just how government is. That's unacceptable. We will definitely have more commentary on this soon. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I wasn't meaning to be flippant. Really, it was just saying, I mean, this is the process though. I mean, all governing bodies have the ability to set those budgets. That's,
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Mr. Coker. We also have, we were joined by Ms. Vogel, if you want to make a comment from Department of Law.
Great. Thank you. And through the chair. So this levy does have dedication language in it. It says the money is to go to the operating expenses of the Anchorage School District to fund teacher positions and student programming. And as Assembly Council already noted, that is a dedication that the voters would have approved and will mean that the money is spent on the categories of funding teacher positions and student programming.
I'm sorry, can I jump back in real quick?
Yeah, Mr. Coker, and then we have a couple more folks in the queue.
Okay, thank you. But we just heard from ASD say that, well, it's actually a school board decision. So what does that language actually do, Ms. Vogel?
Thank you. And through the chair, it dedicates the money to teacher positions and student programming.
Right. But if ASD is saying that, well, actually the school board decides where that money goes, how is that actually dedicated to anything? What prevents ASD from just moving the money around however they want?
Through the chair, this, what it would do is it would constrain the school board that they need to spend $11.8 million on teacher positions and student programming. We have dedicated taxes at the municipal level, and the money that is raised by the dedicated taxes has to be spent on the purpose to which it is dedicated.
So, okay, thank you. So the carte blanche, well, the school board gets to decide, would be limited by this, which is what I was trying to get to earlier in my questioning.
Through the chair, yes, that's exactly why I came up. Just to clarify, we've got the dedicating language in the levy that will constrain the school board.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll just quickly jump in to say, I believe this is also important to kind of think about the distinction between the assembly. We approve the top line number that the school board has brought or lower, right? We can go lower. And then the line item decisions that they make on that are theirs. So that is not within our power. But what I'm also hearing is that voters have the power potentially, depending on how this is written, to put more strings on it or to put constraints on it in a way that the assembly by ourselves cannot. And I'm seeing some nods. Okay, so we have two more folks in the queue. So Ms. Silvers and Ms. Baldwin-Day.
Yeah, and so you've said that the school board will come up with a plan, a spending plan. And they did that with the BSA increase, which was really appreciated because you could see exactly where the money was going to go. And in my experience as a parent of ASD students, one of my kids started the school year in a class of 38. And because of the BSA increase, the school board had already had planned out 2 extra teachers for that school if that BSA increased. And that happened. And so the class size got cut in half. And so I just kind of want to see like that same process where we know how the money is going to be spent. And then, the parents and the teachers can see the money and experience the way that money is spent in their classrooms. I don't know if that makes sense, but.
oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the reasons they did it was to project out, like, here's exactly how we're going to spend the money. So whether it's the legislature, advocates, whoever, to say some point back, here's what they're going to do with it. And here's you can go advocate for it. And that's exactly what they did. Whatever plan they had, they put into place. So it wasn't, and historically, we haven't deviated from our budget significantly at all. I mean, we put this budget in front of you. That's really what it states. We hire our teachers, we get them in place, and once we get those folks in place, again, it's really hard to move them out and disrupt those schools. So once we have got those additional teachers, we had them in place because it was 2 weeks before school opened. We got that money well after our year began. So we had to have those kind of contingency plans in place. So when it did come, we were ready to pull the trigger and get those folks hired.
And to the chair, just put up on the board for folks who want to remind themselves what this looked like last year. When the school budget came to the assembly last year, there was this attachment that said, if there is $1,000 BSA increase, this is exactly what we will do. We'll reverse the various cuts that were outlined in the budget. And we don't control exactly what the school board's going to do, but I fully expect that we would see something similar to this.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Baldwin-Day.
Yeah, thank you. In our December meeting, when you talked us through the pro forma budget for fiscal year 27, the total projected expenditures, if I'm reading this correctly, were $668.7 million. Is that about right?
Yeah, I forget the exact number, but probably close.
In the neighborhood? Okay. Do you recall whether that included the potential increase to the teacher compensation?
It included a 3% COLA adjustment to that. And then since then, we've settled the contract for next year, and it's going to be 5%.
Okay.
So that's kind of what makes that, our initial $83 million deficit went up to closer to 90.
Gotcha. So just trying to do a little rough math here. So an additional 7 million, is that correct? Okay. So a $90 million structural deficit then is 15%. Okay. And looking at the percentages, from fiscal year 26 and how the budget allocations sort of broke out: 5% to administration, 13% to maintenance and operations, 22% to student support, and 60% to direct classroom instruction. So this was fiscal year 26. How do you anticipate those percentage allocations changing with a 14 to 15% structural deficit? Will those percentages remain roughly the same? Where could we expect to see flex happen?
That is a good question. I expect them to be, relatively similar. We haven't finalized our budgets yet, so it's hard to give you specific details. But again, that'll be out here in a week or so, and you guys can see the kind of damage done from a $90 million reduction.
Okay. Yeah, I think there will be a lot of folks who are interested in how that percentage shifts. So I think that if a similar kind of illustration could be provided for fiscal year 27, with perhaps the delta for each of those broad categories, I think that would be really instructive for the public as they're making decisions about the levy.
Yeah, you'll see something very similar. You probably see the exact same chart, just updated for what our new budget is. And then, as always, we'll have our really hyper detailed list of all the position changes and all the supply reductions and whatever money changes we have. So that'll all be public on the next week too.
Great. And I think perhaps a side-by-side comparison would be helpful. Just showing, here's fiscal year 26 and here's 27, and draw your own conclusions kind of thing. So thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, not seeing any. Well, thanks everybody for being here. Again, this ordinance AO 2026-14 will be on our agenda for public hearing and debate because we know that it is considered for the 2026 ballot. So that and all of our bond propositions, anything else that may be headed to the ballot will be on that meeting on Tuesday, including a couple amendments. So again, we will, I think this is our last meeting for the day. So thank you, everybody, and we will be adjourned.